Hello from Mrs. Rania Al-Safadi. English for Palestine, 10th grade. Do you want to listen to a story with me? Today, we will continue with Around the World in 80 Days. What happened after Mr. Fogg, Oda, and Passepartout reached San Francisco? What's wrong with these buffaloes? Why did Passepartout buy some guns? Let's continue with episode 8, By Train from San Francisco. Open your book's pages 30 and 31, Unit 8, periods 11 and 12.
On December 2nd, the General Grant reached San Francisco. Mr. Fogg had neither gained nor lost a single day. It was 7 o'clock in the morning when Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Passepartout set foot on American soil. At the first news vendor he saw, Mr. Fogg inquired when the next train left for New York. The train was scheduled to leave at 6 p.m., so they had the entire day to spend in the California city. They hired a carriage and went to the International Hotel to dine. After breakfast, Mr. Fogg and Aouda were about to leave for the passport office when Passepartout stopped them.
Perhaps I should purchase some rifles and revolvers while I am shopping, Master?
Asked Passepartout. He had heard stories of Indians attacking the trains.
I think it is a useless precaution, but do as you think best,
replied Mr. Fogg. Mr. Fogg and Aouda had not walked 200 steps, however, when they ran into Mr. Fix. The detective pretended to be wholly taken by surprise. Fix asked to accompany them on their walk around San Francisco, a request that Mr. Fogg readily granted. They soon found themselves on Montgomery Street, where a large crowd had collected. The crowd was marching down the street, cheering, "Hooray for Cammerfield!" and carrying large posters and banners.
It is a political meeting,
said Mr. Fogg.
We had better not mingle in the crowd. There may be danger. Yes,
returned Fix.
A political rally can easily turn violent.
They headed toward a flight of stairs at the side of the street that would take them out of the crowd. Just then another group chanting "Hooray for Mandaboy" came up the street from the opposite direction. The cheers quickly turned to shouts, and the posters turned to weapons as the opposing sides assaulted each other. It was too late to escape. Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Fix were caught in the middle. Phileas Fogg and Fix bravely protected their fair companion, jostling roughly with the fighters. A tough, muscular fellow with a red beard rushed at Mr. Fogg with clenched fists. Before Mr. Fogg could clench his own fists, however, Fix stepped in and received the punch instead. Fix fell to the ground. Mr. Fogg stepped over him to face his opponent, but other combatants had moved between them, and he couldn't reach the bearded man.
Yankee,
called Mr. Fogg.
We'll meet again.
Englishman,
retorted the other.
Do you challenge me?
I do,
said Mr. Fogg confidently.
What is your name?
Colonel Stamp Proctor,
said the man.
Mine is Phileas Fogg, and I promise you we will face each other again.
Then the crowd swept them apart. After being assaulted, Fix finally stood up. He had an enormous bruise on his cheek, and his clothes were in tatters. Luckily, Aouda had escaped unharmed. Mr. Fogg was covered in dust, but he was fine. As soon as they were out of the crowd, Mr. Fogg thanked the detective.
No thanks are necessary,
replied Fix.
But let us go.
Where? asked Aouda.
To a tailor.
He laughed, showing them his torn clothes. An hour later, they returned to the hotel with Fix more suitably dressed. Passepartout was there, waiting for his master and armed with half a dozen 6-barreled revolvers. When Passepartout saw Fix, he frowned. His expression changed, however, when Aouda explained their encounter with Colonel Proctor.
Fix seems to be keeping his word,
Passepartout thought. At 6:15, the travelers reached the train station. It was already evening, cold and cheerless, and the sky was overcast. The train left the station on time. Even though it proceeded slowly, pausing at every stop along the line, the train kept Mr. Fogg and his companions on schedule. At 8 o'clock, the steward entered the car and announced that it was time to go to bed. The backs of the seats were lowered, bedrolls were unpacked, and soon each traveler had a comfortable bed with clean sheets and a soft pillow. The next morning, after eating breakfast, Mr. Fogg and his companions watched the landscape of the vast prairies. Mountains lined the horizon, and creeks and rivers passed by their windows. Around noon, the train approached a herd of 10 or 12,000 buffalo that were crossing the tracks. The train slowed, attempting to push through, but the mass of animals was too great. It took 3 full hours for the beasts to clear the tracks. By the time the last buffalo crossed the rails, the first had already reached the horizon. Passepartout was furious at the delay.
What a country!
He cried.
Mere cattle stop the trains. I would like to know if Mr. Fogg foresaw this delay.
While Passepartout was cursing impatiently, Aouda was growing anxious for a different reason. At the last stop, several passengers had walked up and down the platform for fresh air. Among them, Aouda had recognized Colonel Proctor. Her heart pounded when she saw the man that Mr. Fogg had promised to challenge. It was necessary at all costs to prevent Mr. Fogg from seeing his adversary. Aouda seized a moment when Mr. Fogg was asleep to tell Fix and Passepartout.
Colonel Proctor in this train?
Cried Fix.
Well, before he settles with Mr. Fogg, he's got to settle with me.
Mr. Fix, replied Aouda, Mr. Fogg will allow no one to avenge him. He told me that he was prepared to return to America after his journey to find this man. He must not see Colonel Proctor. Mr. Fogg woke up, and the conversation quickly stopped. Aouda madly searched for a way to distract Mr. Fogg. Suddenly, an idea came to her. Whist! She whispered her idea to Fix, and soon after, a game began. Fix knew the game well, and Aouda and Passepartout picked it up quickly. They played all morning. Shortly after lunch, they had just begun a new round when the train let out a whistle and stopped. Passepartout put his head out the window, but could see nothing that could have caused the delay. He jumped out of the car and found the signalman talking to the engineer.
No, you can't pass.
The signalman was saying.
The bridge at Medicine Creek is shaky and can't bear the weight of the train. The river is deep there. It's not safe.
The passengers would have to walk along the river to a safe place to cross, and then walk another 6 hours to the next station. Passepartout's heart almost stopped when he heard this news. By now, a crowd had gathered around the engineer and the signalman, and an argument broke out. Finally, the engineer calmed the crowd and suggested a daring plan. By accelerating the train to its very highest speed, they might have a chance of racing over the bridge before it collapsed into the rapids below. Passepartout was shocked. He was ready to try almost anything to get over Medicine Creek, but this solution was almost a little too daring. He ran back to the cabin to tell the others what was happening.
All aboard!
Cried the conductor. The engineer reversed the train for almost a mile, and then, with a whistle, the train began moving forward again. The engine puffed huge clouds of steam as the train gained speed, going faster and faster. The cars shook and the windows rattled. It was like a frightful iron beast racing to its destruction. Just before the river, the train exceeded 100 miles an hour. It sailed over the bridge, hardly touching the rails at all. The last car had just reached the other side safely when the bridge fell with a crash into the rapids below.
What will happen next? Will Sue attack the train? Stay with us to know the details. I hope you enjoy. Thank you for watching. See you next video.